Yeah, welcome everyone. Our first kind of pop-up webinar, right? So a little short notice, but we've got new things we want to talk about. So we are happy to have you all here. We are recording this session, so we'll send it out to you guys after, and it'll also live on our YouTube channel with the blog coinciding it down the road. Today we're going to focus all about tailoring Microsoft Fabric to fit your analytics objectives. We are going to note that we're not going to intentionally do a Q&A at the end of this session. But throughout this session, as you have questions about Fabric, or if you have questions that you came into the session with that you're like, I want to know this, or how about this? What's your experience like with this? Please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And ideally, we're going to take those, and it's new to us too, right? We're still figuring it out. So we can take your questions and what you're looking for from our team, right? And kind of tailor more content, more webinars around what you're looking to learn about Fabric as we're learning as well. So not going to do quite the active Q&A, but we still want to know what you're thinking about. So throughout the day, just feel free, put anything in the chat, put it in the Q&A. We'll make note of it, and we'll make sure we get things around and back to you throughout the upcoming days and weeks. So myself, I'm Sammy Anderson. I am our marketing manager at Softcrylic. I'm based in the Twin Cities and do all things internal, external marketing for our team. I am joined today by Alex Owen from our data engineering team, as well as Corey Turner from our data visualization team. Now, these two have worked quite a bit together on plenty of engagements throughout the years. Maybe you guys want to open things up by kind of speaking about the traditional separation and the labor of BI engagements together.
Yeah, thanks, Sammy. I appreciate it. Alex and I got started working together sort of at the very forefront, the very start of Softcrylic's engagement with Microsoft's BI tools, with Power BI and the entire Power Platform. That's been a few years ago now. I won't exactly give you an exact count, but we've been working together on engagements sort of across the gamut of technologies and solutions since. And it's always a pleasure to get to collaborate with Alex on just about anything. Definitely, as we have worked together on projects, Alex's engineering expertise and my team's, data visualization expertise are definitely complementary and definitely sort of, end up becoming two sort of essential parts of any solution that we end up building for our customers. And so it's always a pleasure, like I said, working with Alex. We always, we sort of have a feel these days for, what falls into whose camp as far as, as far as the work streams go. And it's sort of I would say, we've sort of got our rhythm down, right, Alex? And we kind of know how this works at this point.
Yeah, it's a long way to say we're sort of attached at the hip, huh? Yeah, so absolutely. We've been working together for a lot of years, and our kind of how we even operate our implementations and things like that as sort of we've optimized that around kind of how you do this from a more traditional architecture, right? And that's kind of the question at hand. So, but today we're going to talk a little bit about how that's sort of being augmented and potential new options, right? So, Corey, do you want to kick us off, or how do you want to start the convo?
I mean, I think it's worth maybe just calling out that traditionally, when we engage on a new sort of end-to-end solution for customers, then it's very definitely figuring out which part comes first. Your team is definitely the sort of the spearhead when it comes to that. I mean, we'll be working alongside with the business and with the stakeholders, with the customer to really identify requirements and really sort of guide our efforts. But when it comes to actually, getting sort of the implementation going, obviously we have to start, with data, with solving for data availability, and with the engineering team. And good architecture is always sort of key to that, making sure that we've got a good solution in place that sort of meets the requirements of the customer in order, across like every piece of that stack, right? And so, typically, Alex, it's your team engaging, you're definitely first contact with the data, and my team is definitely last touch. But there's a very circular relationship, as we're working, right, as we're developing, and whereas your team is gonna be making discoveries that impact the presentation layer design, and the presentation layer, the semantic layer is going to end up informing, what the data team is doing as well.
I think the biggest divide too is because I think nothing we'll talk about today changes the fact that there's two sides to this coin, right? In the way you're just describing. But traditionally, it's just been two different places. So whether that's more mental or anything, it's just like there's a division, right? And what we'll talk about today is this kind of like breakdown of that division and sort of like the opportunities that provides, right? And so yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's still the need for data prep and data transformation and creating sort of things that can be used easily by BI tools. That doesn't go away, right? But Fabric allows for more of that to happen in the same place, and probably a lot more cooperation and from the teams you just talked about, sort of more initial working together on that. So which we're excited about, right? And it sort of breaks down that barrier.
Yeah, for sure.
So you guys touched on kind of your traditional, how we typically engage, right? And then we've got Fabric now. So maybe what is Fabric? Why should we be excited? What makes this so different than the other Microsoft solutions that we know, love, and utilize?
And Sammy, I let you get ahead of me on the deck, so let me just sort of catch up there, and make sure that we're up, where we want to be on the slides. But I think, yeah, that's a great pivot, right? So we have, the way things have been traditionally, and the sort of the division of labor, but also, like Alex brought up, the sort of division of the architecture, and sort of where certain tasks were happening, and really how that ended up sort of segregating the roles that people would play on the team, because people would have familiarity with specific parts of the architecture, and not others, right? And so people would sort of naturally work within their own silo of development there. And so we've talked, about that sort of introduction. If we're pivoting towards Fabric, yeah, I do want to sort of get to the point where we can call out really what we're excited about here. The fact is that, like Alex pointed out, Fabric is this unified analytics solution. It's an end-to-end set of capabilities, and a lot of the marketing material that we're getting from Microsoft is talking about experiences within Fabric, and so that there's all these capabilities, but there are these sort of distinct roles that people who are working inside the tool can sort of take on, and so you have within the same platform, we have places for the people on Alex's team to work, and for the people on the data visualization team, as well as other roles as well. But what Fabric it really is it's a single point of capability for an end-to-end analytics solution. It's software as a service, right? You're paying one price to Microsoft as the vendor for your Fabric capacity each month. That price can certainly scale. There's sort of an entry point, and then it goes up from there, depending on how much of that capacity that you're using. But that capacity is dedicated to you as the tenant, and how you use that is up to you. And so across all these various workloads within the sort of analytic solution, it's up to you to how you want to sort of divvy up the capacity that you have available to you in Fabric. And so for a customer, for an organization that really doesn't have a mature analytics capability, at this point, and maybe they're just getting started on that data journey that we like to talk about so much here at Softcrylic. Then we have, we have what can be potentially the full solution. Now, again, there are, it's a dedicated capacity, and you sort of choose what workloads you want to run on it. The more workloads you run on it, the more of that dedicated capacity you're going to consume. And there is a point at which you're going to exhaust what you've got dedicated to you, and you might need to look at more. But there is an end-to-end capability here that we're excited about, where that we basically are. We can start with sort of the traditional workloads of sort of business intelligence, but also adding on everything that we would need to have in order to build out that full-fledged analytic solution. Alex, did I capture all of that? Anything you would add there?
Honestly, just the fact that, when we talk about comparing to traditional architecture, really it's just, and we'll drive home this point, traditionally it's just much more piecemeal, right? And there's some advantages that we'll talk about today, but it isn't a one size fit all or kind of a one-stop shop, right? You basically got to orchestrate all your different pieces. You got to set up your own storage solution. The concept of a lake, like I said, all these pieces are not exist in traditional architecture. It's more that this is being combined. So traditionally, we'll be setting up kind of a data lake or a blob. You're pulling in data. Your data connectors can be built in other places. All your pipelines and stuff, you got to kind of orchestrate yourself to put in, consolidate data, build your warehouse or your reporting data stores, and kind of do all this different stuff, right? And then you're saying, okay, this data is ready for reporting or for data science, and then you guys need to hook into this or hook into that, right? So it's on you essentially, or your organization, to orchestrate all these different pieces and make sure they all fit together, right? And each one is independently priced and independently scaled. And like I said, there's probably some advantages to sometimes, right, depending on your use case, but it's like a lot more hassle, right? There's a lot more involved. And so the real advantage here that we'll talk about is being able to have that kind of one-stop shop to do everything you need. And, and also the type of resource that you need to do some of these things can be changed a little bit, making it a little bit more accessible to certain types of people. And that's why that experiences comment, Court, you made about, giving you that experience is what Microsoft themselves is sort of playing up. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, it's a different approach, and it's something that, definitely for certain use cases and certain clients, we'd definitely be, looking to explore with them.
Thanks, Alex.
Totally. Let's talk about the components of this BI architecture. What is the distinguishing factors that we bring to the Fabric implementation here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Sammy. And I'll start because I think we want to talk about sort of traditionally what sort of the end point of this BI architecture would be, which would be the sort of business intelligence sort of presentation layer. But then from there, we're going to want to take a step back and talk about the sort of foundations that are under that and really what makes that sort of possible. Traditionally, with the BI layer, the sort of the thing that has to happen in order for BI to work is the data has to somehow get into the BI platform for presentation. And so ultimately, whatever other data work we're doing, ultimately the data at some point has to arrive in the BI platform. And either it's cached there in the BI platform for performance reasons to be able to rapidly present, or if the scale of the data or other constraints mean that we don't want to cache it in the platform, then we're going to set up direct connections to a robust backend server environment in order to enable that capacity. And so that's traditionally been sort of a big part of solving these BI hurdles is figuring out how we're going to get the data into the BI platform and make it available for presentation on a timely basis. And a lot of the challenges that Alex and I have worked to sort of overcome together over the years have been all about like that data transport and figuring out how to refresh the data, within the constraints of the customer's requirements. And that's, there's always a challenge there. What we're excited about with Fabric, and you're going to hear this over and over and over again today as we talk about the various parts of the solution. But what is most exciting about Fabric is the fact that there are no longer individual silos of data for individual workloads. That once the data is in Fabric, the data is accessible to all the different capacities and workloads within Fabric. And so we're going to talk about the magic of how that happens and what the sort of foundational architecture is there that makes that work. But in the BI layer, what that means is there's a new sort of relationship with the data called direct lake model. And when I say relationship, I mean that the BI layer is able to consume the data directly from the same pool of data storage, and that all the other workloads or capacities in Fabric have available to them. There's no need to have a separate data set for BI any longer. And that data, that direct lake architecture, not only does it make that part of the process so much more seamless, but there are performance benefits. There are it de-silos our development. Things like when we're doing business measure development and working on that semantic layer, all of that development becomes available to our other workloads as well. But really, that's the part that is probably most exciting about the BI part of the solution. Is it's still the same Power BI that we all know and love. It's incredibly powerful. Everything that Power BI can do that all the other BI platforms cannot is still there. But what's been added to that is the fact that the BI layer now sits on top of this unified storage architecture that really means we no longer have to fight the battles to get the data into a specific reporting or BI data set.
Awesome. And now, Alex, data storage is the foundation that all of your engineering takes place on. So what are you seeing as some big differences here?
Yeah, so it sort of all ties back to this idea that, you can, it's really the idea behind Fabric is allowing you to bring everything into your one lake directly from the Fabric platform, basically. And you can build out your data connectors. You can you can store all that data. You do have to store it in a specific, format that then is compatible with all these other basically components here that will all read from that one lake. But you could be hooking up your, some of your other tools and things like that. They can expose, like Databricks or other types of things that you can integrate with that one lake. So from a storage perspective, basically, the idea is that this one lake is also your, can be your source of truth, your repository of data. You can use Fabric to bring everything into that lake. You can do all the same type of traditional transformations and pipelines using Spark and Azure Data Factory, and you can do all that as a part of the engineering. And basically, you can pipe all that in, and you will be able to then create all your reporting data sets or your work, prepping all your data for data science. So essentially, the biggest change here is it moves your data storage and your lake into the place where you are going to do all the rest of that, as opposed to in a traditional architecture having it be more of just a staging area in a lot of sense, right? Where a lot of times you're just parking like raw data places, and then you're transforming it and storing, like structured transformed or aggregated data into your, data mart that's over here, right? And then your storage is just kind of a separate place where you stage sort of your raw data that's coming in. This breaks that a little bit and basically says that, hey, I'm going to use my one lake for everything. And anything I hook up into, integrate with Fabric. And there are some, things that we'll talk about from, what you can and cannot do and different versions of things. But essentially, it basically outputs things back into one lake. And that's where Power BI and what Corey was just talking about can directly connect to that, right? And all your, integration of data science tools and your notebooks and things that you're modeling and ML flow and all that stuff can basically touch anything that's in that one lake. So again, it's really kind of a shift in approach, and there are some architectural things that need to be done to make that happen, in sense of storing the data in Parquet format and stuff like that. But essentially, you're putting everything in one place, having all these tools, being able to access it, and taking a lot less of the kind of approach of kind of siloing your data, even if you do have someplace you call your source of truth blob or data lake.
Absolutely.
And I would just add on to that only the fact that I think Alex has captured it perfectly. That on top of that traditional sort of data lake, the thing that makes it a lake house, which is the parlance that's being used now, is there's this compute layer that sits on top of your data lake storage. And so the Delta Parquet file format is the part that makes that, is the entire storage layer is standardized on that, right? And from our experience to date, that can be a very much a just sort of set and forget thing where you don't really have to worry about the way that the data is stored in terms of file structure. You also have access to get under the hood and look at what the file structure is and what the partition size is for the various files and how it's broken up and all that sort of thing. You can tweak that, but it definitely by default will just work. And then the part that sort of makes all these other workloads work on top of that is there's this serverless compute layer that is that is part of the lakehouse solution. It's part of one lake. Is this serverless compute layer that allows the rest of the Fabric workloads to interrogate that data, to query it, and also in some cases, we'll talk about this with Alex's side of the house, to write back to it, to be able to write to the file-based storage in the lakehouse as if it were as if it were a live production like SQL backend somewhere. You have that full ability to interrogate the data, across all these workloads. So the Power BI layer can do that. There's a data mart layer that we'll talk about that can do that. Any of the data science and analytics workloads, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really that compute layer. Definitely chews up your capacity. The more things that you have that are interrogating the data, the more you're going to see that capacity get used up. And again, in this architecture, in this solution, capacity is a finite resource, right? I mean, you can always buy more, but in terms of what you've got for the whatever dollar you're spending, you're going to have a limited amount to work with. But you can allocate that however it is that you like.
Absolutely. Is there anything in that same regard that you want to address around data availability that we haven't touched on yet?
I think that from a data availability standpoint, I guess the overarching concept is that, what you put into your one lake is available to all of these tools. Whereas like in other architectures, it can be a much more, it's not really meant for that, right? A lot of times it's like you're staging data there to feed another particular downstream workload, but it's not just that every tool you have in your tool set has availability to everything you have over here. So it does create a little prep work because you have to put the data that you want available to these, tools that we'll talk about, and BI is one of them, obviously, into your OneLake. But it definitely is something that we want to be able to make available, and you have access to, and you can use everywhere. So it takes a slightly different approach to data availability, and it's basically something that we would call Fabric something where the data is available at all times. It's like kind of the overarching theme of Fabric, and it takes a little orchestration to get there, but it's an overall a different approach.
Fabulous. On a similar note, what would either of you prefer to call out around data stitching and transformation with this?
Yeah, so on the data stitching part, right, the all of the same type of, you guys are familiar with, using Azure Data Factory, or Spark or anything. There is Fabric markets basically that they are able to do anything you want to do that you would typically do in your own traditional architecture in, Azure Synapse or something like that. You can integrate, like I've mentioned, the Databricks or other things to do some of that extract, transformation and push stuff back in. So there is basically that full tool set. Probably the restriction there that we'll keep revisiting is that anything that's done in Fabric is using that same capacity that you are doing for all these other tools or workloads, right, for your data science and for your Power BI. So even though there's might be serverless compute in order to scale, these things are able to scale independently, they still eat the same capacity limits, right? And so but from a feature perspective, or from a capability perspective, you really can you can schedule, you can build out your transformations. You can do Spark jobs to kind of transform data, to aggregate data, to basically do any sort of that pipeline work that you would traditionally do. And the one thing I would say is that they're overarching on the data engineering side, and this sort of spans collecting data, cleaning or transforming it into, or aggregating it into your, what you need for downstream, workloads, whether it's, reporting in Power BI or data science, which obviously we have a more granular data set, or other sorts of, applications and things that you might be using, right? In Fabric, there's a much more concentrated approach to appealing to citizen developers or data analysts, or people that are not hardcore data engineers and hardcore SQL developers, right? So there's a lot more intuitive UI to allow you to, without writing complex queries, to have a solution that allows you to do some of that transformation and data collection, right? As there's built-in data connectors to common data sources. It's, with a little bit of you get what you get kind of thing. So, it's maybe not the same as you building your own connector with all the, the exact endpoints or configurations you need. But, there's these things get expanded over time, and it will probably meet a lot of people's use cases, right? So if you have, your team is mostly made up of data analysts, not data engineers, Fabric will allow you to immediately sort of jump into a place that you could start to build out a lot of the things that that you couldn't before in more of a traditional architecture, where you had to have people that knew how to implement in a cloud developer sort of way, right? And sort of implement pipelines in a traditional approach, and write complex SQL queries and store procedures, and implement an Azure Data Factory or the like in GCP or as AWS. So essentially, the biggest thing I could say about the data engineering side is capabilities are the same, but also the added ability from a more traditional type of engineering approach, but also the capabilities for more of citizen developers, and being able to collect that data and to transform it and prep it for downstream systems. There's a lot more potential there for other types of resources in your organization to be able to contribute to it, which is, for a lot of organizations is a big change and something that they would probably welcome.
Absolutely. Corey, do you have anything to add on that?
I think Alex has wrapped that up really well. I do want to like maybe as we pivot into the sort of the next piece, there's some things that sort of tie in, but I don't think there's anything I need to go back, any horses that I need to beat any further on that particular topic here. But Sammy, I would say, that as we sort of pivot toward the question of, how analytics and data science are enabled with this solution, the step to sort of get there is this piece that's on screen now, which is the sort of the data warehouse experience. And this is pretty exciting stuff. Because what this is basically letting us do is all of the work that Alex's team have done on the pipeline pieces, all of that work is exposed to other workloads, other consumers of the data in sort of the data by the data warehouse. And what the data warehouse is it's basically a SQL endpoint that allows, again, for interrogating that that storage layer. But it can also it's not just the storage layer, it's any other semantic development that's been done on top of the storage. So any business measures, any of the work that we've done in Power BI as far as building out DAX expressions to answer specific business questions, all of that, the relationships between tables and the data model, all of the sort of core work that is necessary in order to make Power BI or any other sort of BI platform deliver the results and the insights that are so transformative. That same development is liberated out of the silo that it's in and made available to other consumers of the data via this data warehouse experience, which again just provides a SQL endpoint, but that SQL endpoint allows, as you interrogate the data, to not just interrogate the native fields that are in the data, but any sort of calculations that have been built on it in the semantic layer as well. And then also what we were starting to talk about a little bit ago, Alex, in that we can also write with this data warehouse experience. There is the ability to write back to the data via traditional SQL methods, stored procedures, and the like. And so this is yet another way that sort of traditional expertise can be leveraged for a bunch of different reasons in this whole sort of end-to-end capacity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you do have to, there are basically there's that SQL endpoint, the SQL analytics endpoint basically allows anything that's been put in there into the lakehouse to kind of instantly be generated into what you could think of as tables to be able to directly query from. And anything that's been, put back in there, and you can read it basically. And there's also then the capability to basically treat it as more traditional data warehouse, where you're basically doing that, read and write, and basically building out that, kind of repository of data that, as you are, having either your data pipelines, making updates and sort of processing data or whatnot. So there's multiple capabilities and used for different use cases, essentially, whether it's exploration or whether it's sort of doing those sort of transformations. But yeah, so that you have options there, and you have, it's based on, T-SQL, and it's basically those tools to be able to basically do what you need depending on your use case and what your how you're sort of implementing those downstream workloads is the best way to put it, I guess. So you can sort of implement how you need here, And, depending on not just the workloads, but who you have to build out those pieces, whether, again, they're hardcore data engineers on your IT team, or they are, your data analysts, or they are, your traditionally your BI team that doesn't have as much exposure to, prepping the data. You can sort of do that in sort of different ways, depending on your use case. So Fabric gives you a lot of flexibility there. And the ability to kind of decide what is right for you when you build out that piece. And it's certainly something that we'll be exploring more and more as we, said this at the beginning, but obviously Fabric's very new, right? And so as we explore this and sort of be able to, push the limits, I would hope, of their capabilities, we'll start to figure out exactly what is, the best way to sort of orchestrate, how you set that data up in that warehouse. But to Corey's point, the idea is that you have access to basically pretty much everything to be able to do your analysis and your workloads and your, all these other downstream systems, which we started with because we wanted to highlight that is the most important part. But then this is as usual, this is the foundation, right, to be able to do all that stuff.
And I think, it's worth calling out that, like, the way that sort of even gets extended even further is, for example, with sort of traditional data science architecture, you'd be wanting to pull the data out to some sort of box with a ton of compute on it, right? That would, in some sort of instance, that would let you crunch the numbers and do the sort of vast amounts of processing necessary for some deep, analytics or machine learning or predictive analysis, that sort of thing. And certainly we can continue to do that here. But we also have, because Fabric is this dedicated capacity that encompasses, both storage and compute, we can, you have the ability to use your Fabric capacity for the actual data science experiments and for those workloads, right? And so the data is already stored there. You don't have to pull the data out. You don't have to transport the data out to your high performance instance somewhere. And you can do your whatever operations is that you want to do on the data in order to satisfy your requirements for data science. And then your output is right there on the same capacity. Anything that's got any sort of thing that's there's whatever the sink is that's writing the data back to your capacity, you're already there. It's there. It doesn't need to be transported back. But again, the cost here is the fact that, again, this is all on the shared capacity. So if we're running our machine learning number crunching on the Fabric instance, then it's using those Fabric, the dedicated capacity for that. And again, it's all one pile of capacity that you're dividing across all these workloads.
And you can migrate in your own or bring in your own your own models, right? You don't have to reinvent everything in here. You can bring in your notebooks and basically link to them. And there's integration, but you are basically you're basically integrating that into ML flow, the machine learning flow that's needed to Azure, and doing, as Corey said, not pulling out the data, but really doing it in here. So whether this is the right use, I would say that we, to be honest, have not fully, implemented a large scale data science solution in here yet. And it may or may not be the best solution if that is what your use case is, right? It may be that this is good for lighter, machine learning type of use cases where you are dabbling in that, or maybe that it's great for large scale as long as you're willing to pay for that capacity. So it's really a little it gives you the option, gives you the ability to do this, but it doesn't mean that it's the right for everyone. And as we go through this, we're obviously playing up some of these advantages, but want to be realistic about some of the things that, may not be, the best fit for your use case, or maybe that it's a little untested, right? So, this is an exploration, process for us, and we're starting to implement in Fabric and definitely liking a lot of the pros. But there are some things that we'll definitely be keen to see how well they hold up and how much that, eats that capacity, right? So, there's definitely different use cases that might be, whether you decide whether you want to use this capability or not.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's also a good segue probably into sort of talking about Sammy, I think we talked about next, we were going to talk about traditional approaches, right? And sort of what the continued benefits were there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Alex, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously been doing this for a long time in a more traditional approach of siloing everything, right? And I spoke very much at the beginning that there's pros and cons to that still, right? I mean, essentially, especially if you have a large enterprise scale data layer where your ecosystem, where you have lots of different data that you are collecting and processing and serve a lot of different varied use cases, whether reporting or this one piece, data science is another piece, but then you also integrate with a lot of your other systems and downstream applications, and you have a really kind of vast kind of data ecosystem that you're dealing with. It's not just kind of one type of data. It's organizational data. It's all sorts of things, right? There may be a place for Fabric in that, especially since what we talked about the absolute immediate benefit of being able to have your BI tool basically seamlessly integrate with this data and your data science tools, and basically use that data and just have it available. There's no loading, or I did see a question around the BigQuery connector or something like that basically has to go fetch that data, right? That doesn't exist in Fabric. It's there, it's working directly on it. So there may be use cases where there are use cases where that's just an overriding benefit that you want to do whatever you need to be able to get that, to take advantage of that, right? But then there's, in a traditional approach, some things that you might want to have siloed, right? And you might want to spend, need to spend a lot of money on the compute capacity or the capacity or storage, or separate, be able to dial up and dial down separately, the things you need in those particular silos. And you have a team that's going to be dedicated to that. And that's where it should live, right? And basically to break it up, or you have a lot already built, right? It's not necessarily that if you have a large thing already built, that it's okay, drop everything, move everything into Fabric. Maybe that it's move some things into Fabric, right? Or think about the long term of what you're going to use this for and get that type of data in. So it's not a one-stop shop here. As we explore this, we definitely see the benefits, and I think Corey will talk a little bit more about that. But on the traditional side, there are still reasons to silo things, and there are still, especially to dial in costs and things like that, so that you can be spending exactly what you're expecting to spend on each piece, as opposed to having as I won't call it a slush fund of capacity, but it's somewhat of a slush fund of capacity, right? You're all going to compete against each other, and you have to be the one that's careful, what you implement, and sort of what and control for that, as opposed to this is how much I'm spending on this data storage, this is how much I'm spending on my Azure SQL, Azure Synapse instance, this is how much I'm spending on my Power BI capacity in my node here, and basically break that up, and your teams are dedicated. And so absolutely everyone's use case is different, and there's definitely some we would probably still recommend some traditional approaches depending on what you have currently, and large scale what you're trying to do, right?
And yeah, I definitely want to call out some of the same of what Alex is saying, because again, at Softcrylic, we have been building sort of bespoke data solutions for our customers for a long time, right? And we've been building those, piece by piece, individual components of the stack. And there's a reason that we do that, because in in a lot of those cases, we're able to sort of precisely control the spend that way. We're able to precisely control costs. We're able to right size performance, against what is actually needed. And again, there's not this sort of just a sort of big bucket of capacity that we sort of have to divvy up on the fly against various workloads. I have been on a lot of Microsoft calls in the last quarter or half where we've been talking about this new platform, and everybody's super excited, and I'm one of them. I am thrilled about this and really excited about where this positions us for our customers to be able to offer them sort of an end-to-end solution where that might have previously been out of reach, either because of just pure budget or because of just time to build out a solution, or but here we've got all the pieces and parts, and I'm thrilled about that. I do think that it's still going to serve us well to be mindful of what we know works. And I know I was sitting in on a call with a Microsoft guy talking about, okay, how do we estimate the amount of Fabric capacity that's going to be consumed by various workloads, and how do we tell our customers how much Fabric capacity they're going to need? And the Microsoft guy, I'm not going to name names or what call it was or whatever, but he all but burst out laughing on the call. And he just said, guys, he said, at this point with this platform, your best bet is to do a POC and sort of, and now analyze your utilization on the POC and make projections going forward. But that basically every sort of implementation is going to be different enough at this point that it's really hard to accurately estimate the capacity utilization. And Microsoft's hard at work on this. They're trying to build out calculators and heuristics for putting together good estimates of how much Fabric capacity is going to be needed. But right now it's very Wild West. And so if you have the ability to do a POC and to sort of see where that goes, I think there's a lot of upside. But if you need to sort of tightly control the various pieces and parts of your solution and make sure that they are constrained to various limits, then there are still vast benefits to the traditional approaches. The other thing that I've heard said by the Microsoft teams is that they definitely are promoting the low code to no code approaches here across all these experiences, and certainly you're going to hear about Copilot integration with Fabric, and all of that that sort of Chat GPT enabled stuff as well. But all of that has a cost as well too, in terms of resource utilization. And the fellow that I was speaking with on the Microsoft call said that those low code to no code solutions might have as much of as like 100% premium versus a developer actually going in and handwriting code in that on the same for the same use case on the same capacity, that just the stuff that's done with the GUI is going to be that much less efficient. So definitely there are massive benefits still to traditional architecture where those use cases are warranted. But we're here today because we're excited about Fabric. We're excited about what this means for you as our partners, as we're working to come alongside your organization and help you deliver on this sort of promise of an end-to-end data solution that enables that sort of the insights that drive transformation and really become a complete game changer for your business. We're thrilled that this is a new way that can start to happen. And so we look forward to, if you've got a use case for Fabric that either augments your existing solution, or or it maybe becomes something that you want to migrate towards, or maybe this is a brand new solution that we're standing up for your organization. We would love to be part of that conversation going forward, and putting this sort of the possibilities of this new capacity, I guess is the right word, into place for you and for your organization.
Absolutely. I guess any other closing thoughts, guys, as we're kind of coming up on time, other than we are excited about Fabric. We're here to help. We're here to learn. We'll keep the chat open a little bit if you have questions you want us to kind of analyze, like I said before, for future content. But yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna say that. So as questions came in, I tried to integrate some of those answers into my talking about this without really directly talking or answering a specific question. But please drop your questions in. We really want to do a follow-up basically to we'll take those questions and sort of structure more of a kind of more of a use case driven kind of content around, if you're doing this, this is what we see the advantages of or disadvantages, right? And we want to basically bake in some of your questions and some of the other questions we've collected from other places, and sort of answered in more of a implementation style way. So we'll definitely come out and follow up with some more content there. So please drop your use case in. A little bit of, just to, give you one thought here is that because Fabric is so new, some of this is going to be, and what we're actively doing with some of our clients is we're setting this up and seeing how well it behaves, because a lot of this is untested. There's obviously good, reason to be excited, and the capabilities we can see are there, performance testing and what really does work well and what doesn't work well, and what really the limitations are when using something, versus doing it in a more traditional approach, is oftentimes something that, we'll be finding out. And your specific use case, it may be something that there is probably a pretty direct, or not an easy answer, but a direct answer about. And then there's others where it's that is something we'd be also interested to see how well that works, right? And we can answer honestly based on what we know for sure and what we don't know. But we definitely want to style kind of a whole kind of piece of content, whether it's a webinar or some other sort of thing we put out, directly related to that. So we're still trying to figure out how the best way it is to answer some of those questions. So please drop them in, and we promise we will be following up about this, because it's definitely a very big point of emphasis on our side, is to figure out the right style of implementation for different use cases, right? So we'd love to hear kind of what you're thinking, or what is getting jostled around in your organization's thought about this, because I'm sure if you're here, you're already interested in Fabric in some capacity, right? So capacity, word of the day.
Definitely. Speaking of capacity, I would wrap by saying, some of you know that some of you are here because you're familiar with Softcrylic's dashboard in a day program that we deliver. As of next week, we are starting to deliver Fabric Analyst in a day, which is a day-long boot camp on Fabric. We are going to be delivering it once a month going forward. And just as long as that makes sense, and I think it's going to make sense for a long time. This first month is definitely working out the kinks. This is brand new, so I'm not sending out invitations to all of our alumni or business contacts to come join our first month session. And these classrooms are going to have lower capacity than our dashboard in a day classrooms had. I'm not sure exactly what the limit's going to be, but it's not going to be hundreds in a classroom. But all that to say, want you to know that that's going to be available, and that we're going to be doing the Fabric in a day throughout 2024. And as we feel like the program is mature and ready, for our sort of most valid our most, pardon me, most valued, not valid, our most valued contacts, those of you that we've talked to and worked with in the past. Definitely want to make sure that you are aware of it and you're invited, and you can look forward to hearing from us on Fabric in a Day when that is, just as soon as we're confident that it's ready for general consumption.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all for coming. The recording will get sent out to you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It's been
Bye.
great.